Hi everyone, my name is Leon and welcome to the Leland PF event debrief. Without further ado, let's get into it. So the first question that needs to be answered obviously is, what is PF? PF is a partner debate event where teams defend a certain policy option, also known as a resolution. PF resolutions always have real world implications and are also current events. PF would expand your knowledge about topics such as foreign and domestic policy, economics, etc., and just really expand your knowledge about how the world works in general. Sometimes the resolution is about something happening right now, such as automation. However, as fun as this sounds, PF requires a lot of research to be successful. However, don't let this discourage you. The VPs and chairs are always here to help, and research is not tedious if you enjoy doing it. With research in mind, let's talk really quickly about evidence. These are the California High School Speech Association's rules about evidence specifically in PF. In order for evidence to be counted as legitimate, you must at minimum read the last name of the author and the year published. In addition, all your evidence needs to be in cut card format for reference of the judges and competitors. This is an example of what a cut card looks like. Now let's go a bit deeper into the event and talk about the specific speeches in PF. For context, each partnership has a first speaker and a second speaker. Constructives, first crossfire, and summaries are given by the first speakers. Rebuttals, second crossfire, and final focuses are given by the second speakers. Each debate begins with 2 constructive speeches, each speech which is 4 minutes. Then there's a brief crossfire period between the first speakers. Then there's 2 rebuttal speeches, which are each 4 minutes. Then there's another 3-minute crossfire period, this time between the second speakers. Then there's 2 summary speeches, which are each 3 minutes. However, the California High School Speech Association's rules state that summaries are 2 minutes, so when you compete at a league tournament, be aware of this. Then there's another 3-minute crossfire period, known as grand crossfire, between all of the speakers. Then there's 2 final focus speeches, each 2 minutes. Let's talk about specifically what each speech does. So first is constructive. The constructive speeches establish what arguments you are going to make and defend throughout the entire debate. Affirmative teams will always make arguments about why a certain policy is good, while negative teams will always make arguments about why a certain policy is bad. Then in first crossfire, the first speakers of each team ask each other's questions about the opposition's arguments in a respectful manner, and this means that you can't be toxic, because if you're toxic, then judges are going to hate you. If you use this effectively, crossfires can take out opponents' arguments or set up a response in rebuttal. Then, what happens in rebuttal? In rebuttal, second speakers attack their opponent's arguments. Specifically in second rebuttal, speakers can rebuild their case by responding to the first rebuttal. Then in second crossfire, second speakers can either ask questions about their opponent's arguments or responses. Then in summary, first speakers have to condense the round by going over the key arguments and responses in the round. In my opinion, summary is by far the hardest speech to give because the entire first half of the debate, which is roughly 19 minutes, has to be condensed into 3-minute speeches. In Grand Crossfire, both speakers are allowed to ask the opposition crossfires, and this is mildly problematic because this really often results in a shouting match. So once again, please remember to be respectful to your opponents. This is usually to clear up an area with a lot of clash in the debate. And finally, in final focus, second speakers explain why they win in a speech. They essentially just write out the judge's ballot for them. And this should be a direct mirror of summary, but shorter and more condensed. So now we're going to look at a few of the speeches that were just mentioned in action. So the first one we're going to see is a second rebuttal, and we're going to look specifically at the frontlining process, or the rebuilding process.
Their first weighing is that there are multiple reasons that can cause a recession, but argument that the greatest risk and the one that could cause the massive shock is going to be a cyber attack. Their second argument is that terror is intergenerational, it lasts for a long time. First, we say that you can't get out of a recession because of a stimulus package, because if your banks are shut down, there's no way to get out of a recession. It is still intergenerational. But secondly, we fundamentally change the economy of these countries and we're keeping them in recession. It's the same extent as a terror. Third, they say that there's no advocates in these countries. We are still affecting the countries that don't have any advocates, where we're talking about an interconnected recession that affects everyone. Their fourth weighing is that it's prerequisite because of conflict. But a recession in Africa doesn't really do a recession across the world, whereas you are targeting the pinpoint of the US economy, which is the pinpoint of the rest of the economy, which means that our recession always outweighs there.
So the first thing that he had to respond to was weighing read by his opponents. And like you might be confused what weighing is, and we'll get more into this if you were to join the event, but what weighing essentially is why their arguments matter more. So I thought that his responses to the weighing done were really, really good, and specifically at the end, like when he read this thing about how their recession outweighs theirs, like I thought that was really, really good because it means that the judges prioritize their recession because simply just more people are affected.
Let's go to our first warrant here. They talk about defense. The biggest problem here is that they don't explain or contextualize how defense is important in the first place. They just span like 6 responses here, but never once tell you how defense is actually going to be stopping anything in the status quo. Group all of them together. First, it's about the idea about the perception. Even if our defensive measures are good right now, my burden is to be proven to you how attacks are increasing right now. Secondly, we would say that if at the point where attacks are increasing, that means that every one of the reasons why they give you about defense being good right now is not true. Trillions of dollars are being taken out of the economy. Their advocacy is not working. They read a blip about nuclear weapons. We didn't talk about nuclear weapons. Let's go to their argument about Russia being cyber. This is non-responsive. Even if Russia fills in, we say that the only country that countries don't actually want to listen to is the United States, because the United States is the main norm setter. Group all 7 responses there, all 7 of their things together. Once again, attacks are increasing right now. These are all hypothetical. If these were true, we'd see that attacks are going down right now. It's not the case right now. We're seeing trillions of dollars being taken out of the economy right now. They're really mishandling this new uniqueness debate.
This part of the speech is by far, I think, in my opinion, the best part of the speech because it was just super efficient. You might have noticed that he did a lot of grouping. Specifically on his first argument, he had to respond to like 7 responses. He just grouped all 7 of them together and responded to them sufficiently in 10 seconds, and I think that that's what everyone should try to do.
On their turns, their first one is about deterrence. 1, this is not contextualized at all. They don't explain to what extent deterrence works. This was literally said in like 6 seconds. But secondly, we'd say they're not weighing this deterrence at all. We say that deterrence is always greater in a world in which countries aren't afraid that we're about to strike them back. Their second argument is about an alternative to kinetic wars. This is not true. Once again, this is a link into their case. We said that drone strikes are increasing right now, which means clearly it's not an alternative to kinetic wars. We're going to be doing it no matter what. They say cooperation is happening right now. We say cooperation is not working right now because their agreements are being violated. On our impact level, they say our impact is not about a recession. It says a financial shock will happen. Pretty close to this definition of a recession. Then they say that 900 million people into poverty was based on like 2008 and not growth. Call for the evidence. It just says that if a major economic shock happens, it'll push 900 million people into poverty. Let's go to their case.
So yeah, that concludes the frontlining portion of his speech. So I think the main takeaways from this speech is A, the efficiency, specifically the part about grouping that I mentioned before, but then B, when he responded to the turns, specifically the one about the turns, he didn't really directly respond to it, he outweighed it. So I thought that was really smart on his part. Now we're going to look at a final focus speech, and this is the second final focus.
Sorry. Yeah. All right. They basically concede the Wall Street Journal evidence that says inflation, number 1, it says inflation has decreased by 95%. That, at that point, is like basically concedes the debate, because if like they want to debate about a risk or probability, if inflation is already decreasing at best, that's just terminal defense that their impact is not unique. But even then, the implications of Trey makes this twofold. Number 1, that means that Maduro didn't even want to do the stabilizing program because he messed up the economy in the first place. If he really did want to stabilize the economy, he wouldn't have caused inflation to rise. He would have just agreed to the package outright. He's never going to do so. We say that's historically proven. But number 2, we say that even if he does agree to the stabilizing package right now, in the future he's probably going to mess up the package regardless. He's going to mess up the economy again, meaning that they have no long-term impact. Those implications are basically conceded. But then we say that if he has his only incentive, that then they say that if we allow sanctions to stabilize the program, then it generates the economic growth. But they never respond to the Brennan evidence that says that even if the economy fully stabilizes, even if you give them 100% of their offense, none of that revenue is actually going to the people. In fact, the Brennan evidence is very good at saying that all the revenue in the economy from back then literally did not go to the people. The AQ piece of defense has also conceded that no one wants you to invest. That means that stabilization package won't even work because investors aren't willing to work with them. That's also terminal defense.
I think the main takeaway from the first half of his speech when he was addressing his opponent's case is the stuff he said at the end, which is like, oh, if you give them 100% of their offense, they can still lose the debate because it basically signals to the judges that like it's impossible to vote for them.
Let's go to our case. The only response we get is this Reuters evidence that 98% imports were decreasing. First of all, we say that none of the imports from before were actually going to the people, so this isn't offense for them. But the second thing we say is that he's agreeing to reforming the status quo. Obviously, this doesn't happen overnight, but we say things like agreeing to the unit stuff to come in and also just agreeing to like water packages and stuff indicates that he wants to go to the people. We also get this response that 650,000 people, it wasn't because it is not happening so far. But we say the UNICEF evidence says that hundreds of thousands of kids are already getting benefited in the status quo. The reason why our third contention is really important is because it's the only risk of offense of any revenue or any single dollar or bolivar actually going to something that benefits the people. Insofar as before sanctions came in place, Maduro had no incentive to actually benefit the people. We need sanctions to pressure him into going into it. That also controls the internal link into state collapse, because if the economy is not reformed, then there is not going to, even if the economy crashes or it stabilizes, none of that money is going to go to the people. Okay, even on its way, he says that destabilization in the sanctions are going to allow it to give money to the people. We say he has no incentive to actually give the money from the stabilization program. He's always just going to feed his generals like he did before sanctions. Otherwise, like at today's round, you should vote for uniqueness. It's getting better for the people right now because before sanctions there was no benefit and the economy inflation is going down.
I think the main takeaway from this speech, this half of the speech where he addressed his own case, the main takeaway from this part is when he said like, oh, the reason why our third contention is so important. Because this basically just signals to the judges, if we even have a slight chance of winning this argument, you vote for us because it's the most important argument in the round. And they did win that argument. They ultimately did win the debate. That concludes the presentation. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you want to see additional resources to learn more about PF or to see the videos that we used for this presentation, you can see all the links here. In addition, you can also access these slides here. And yeah, I hope to see y'all in PF this season.
I have one question and one question only for y'all. Do you like basketball?